Namaste everyone. Welcome to this evening's Y20 Talks program. What is Y20? Y20 is the youth outreach program of the prestigious G20. This evening's program is jointly organized by Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation, New Delhi, and the Varanda Club. Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation is a think tank based in New Delhi, and it has been ranked number 30th as the go-to think tanks of the world by the Wharton School of Business, the Lauder Institute. It's a very prestigious institute based in Delhi. And this evening we have two scholarly people with us who will be elaborating and discussing on the ancient lessons from Bharat on peace and conflict resolution. Professor Kanagasabapati sir, who is a secretary and trustee at Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation, is the former chairman of ICSSR New Delhi and a member of ICSSR now. He is also our chairman Varanda Club. He has written 3 books in English, 2 in Tamil. He is a cultural economist. His first book is The Unorganized Sector, The Growth Engines of Indian Economy. The second book, Prosperous India. The third book, Indian Business Models of Economy, Business and Management. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you, thank you.
We have with us author Venkatesh Rangan, who's a very young author who has achieved quite a lot in quite a short time. He is a banker by profession. He has written 3 books. The first being The First Republic, the untold true story of the Karbari Sarkar, which details about the Maratha Empire. His second book, Age of the Pie and Prose, the incredible 3 Indian decades that taught the world about Indian history, and also his latest books. The latest book is Bharat's Military Conquest in Foreign Lands. Welcome Venkatesh ji for this program.
Thank you, Jagat sir.
Over to Professor sir to lead the discussion.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Jagan. You know, today's topic is a very important one. The world is in a dilemma now. This is because everywhere there is conflicts. So conflict resolution is very important. You know, peace is an absolute necessity for a society to progress. You know, Indian civilization is the only civilization in the world where prosperity and peace existed together jointly for thousands of years. If we read the Indian history, we will come to know on the one side there was prosperity, on the other side there was peace. So Indian civilization always aimed to grow based on peace. So this is a very important fact that the modern world should understand. If we see the Western world for the last 2000 years, you know, from the beginning, at least, there have been continuous conflicts. In the recent years, conflicts have increased. So this is high time that when India is leading G2, that we have to discuss this very important topic. And to discuss this from the ancient perspectives, we have a very talented historian, Sri Venkatesh Rangan, who has written books and he is doing continuous research on it. So he'll be speaking on peace and conflict resolution from our ancient records of Bharat. You know, he'll deal with different records. Of course, it will be difficult for him to explain everything in about 40-45 minutes, but he will be taking the important aspects and then presenting to us. After that, maybe for about 10-15 minutes, we can have questions and answers. So I invite Sri Venkatesh Rangan to make his presentation.
Firstly, thank you, Professor G, for such a wonderful introduction to this topic. So I have prepared a very small presentation, which I will just share with the honored guest here, and I'll take this forward. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Sure. So we will start off with what are the causes and conflict of the disorder in the world today. I will then introduce a concept called the Chakravarti and the Chakravarti Kshetra concept, which is based on the ancient Bharatiya Sanskriti, what it means and how it can contribute to world governance and world peace. I will look at certain records. Okay, so I have picked up one Sanskrit inscription one foundational text of our civilization, which is the Mahabharata, and one very interesting Sanskrit coin inscription, right? So based on these records, I will detail out what is the concept of a Chakravarti and a Chakravarti Kshetra. I'll give actual examples from history on how uh, the Chakravarti approach has actually solved problems across the world. And finally, I will relate it to the problems we are facing today and how these problems can be tackled by these ancient Bharatiya principles of which I'm going to elucidate. So let me start off firstly. If we look at today, we are in a world of chaos and disorder. I mean, if we actually look at it all around us, we have wars, we have the scourge of terrorism, we have the scourge of fanatical ideologies. And what are the causes of this, right? So if we go very, I would say in a very in an overview perspective, there's obviously inequality in economic development. There's inequality in social progress. There is also an inability to accept diversity. So we have ideologies or mindsets which say that only what we believe is right, what others who don't believe, the unbelievers, they should not exist, or they should exist in a very secondary kind of state. Like there's a hierarchy which is there basically, and we also have a world full of national and ideological supremacist ideologies. It may be atheist or theist ideologies, right? So it says that this is what I believe in, this is the God I believe in, and we should expand the world, conquer the world, so that everyone believes in this God and this ideology. And what this creates is a power hierarchy. So there are certain nations which feel that we are exclusive and the others are not. So whether it be climate change, whether it be the World Trade Organization talks, whether it be any multilateral institution, right? The basic issue we find is some kind of a perception of discrimination or a differentiation. It may be between least developed countries, developing countries, and the developed world. It may be against P5 versus the rest, whatever. So there's ultimately a lack of representation of marginalized voices, societies, and nations. And obviously, we now face a scourge of cross-border terrorism, a concept of total war. So there are, I would say, nations and organizations which believe that there's no bar, right? You can just destroy, whether it be civilians, whether it be infrastructure, totally other nations' identity or livelihood, just for the fact to prove a supremacist point of view. So I think this whole ideology of a total war, which cross-border terrorism involves, I think that is also a big cause of conflict. So ultimately, why is all this still surviving? And I believe the reason is because there are certain gaps in our world governance institutions, our multilateral institutions. India has for a very long time has pushed forward for reforms in our multilateral institutions. Classic example is the United Nations Security Council. Recently, our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, in fact, made a very interesting statement. He said that can we have a Security Council which does not represent 1/6 of humanity, which is India? And it is not just about India. You look at any other the Bretton Woods organizations, the climate change talks. Are the voices of the least developed countries, the small island nations, are they being represented? Is there a voice of Africa in the Security Council? So what we find is ultimately a world governance where there's inadequate representation, inclusion, and a world vision which does not in a way align, okay, with something which everyone is inspired. So the question is, can there be an alternative ideology or an alternative vision to improve or reform this world governance? And that is where my whole presentation on Chakravarti Kshetra comes. So Professor, should I move ahead or would you? So basically, so if we look at it basically, what is a Chakravarti and a Chakravarti Kshetra concept, right? In very simple terms, in our ancient Bharatiya Sanskriti, in our ancient Indian civilization, a Chakravarti is a universal sovereign. He is a world emperor, okay, or a world ruler. And a Chakravarti Kshetra is an area over which he aimed to establish his governance. And this governance was based on certain values and principle, and it sought to bring peace, order, and prosperity. I think what you were talking in the introduction, right? A prosperity and peace together. So that was what the vision of the Chakravarti Kshetra was. Now we have several examples in our itihasa, in our recounting of our history as per our civilization. Like Pururava, Raghu, Sagara, Prabhu Sri Ram, Lord Sri Ram. In fact, Ram Rajya is considered to be the epitome of political governance, social and cultural renaissance also, but the epitome of an entire social and political governance in our Hindu ethos. And obviously, Samrat Yudhishthira. So we have several examples. Now the question is, what does exactly Chakravarti Kshetra mean? Right? Now, our Mahabharata, Ramayana, and our Arthashastra explain this in great detail. But a summary of this is found in a very beautiful inscription and description called the Prayaga Prashasti. Okay. This Prayaga Prashasti was written by a Sandhi Vigrahika Harisena, who was, as the name suggests, Sandhi, who was proficient in Sandhi or who was a foreign minister of the Gupta Empire. Now, the Gupta Empire is one of the powerful empires of Indian history. And this Harisena was a foreign minister to Samudragupta, who is also one of the great emperors of Indian history. So now, as per this Prashasti, Samudragupta's father told him when he was young, when he was going to ascend the throne, that protect the whole earth. Okay. So how, now the question is, how does he protect the whole earth? Right. So he aspires to be a Chakravarti. What should he do to be a Chakravarti? And there is where Harisena in his Prashasti mentioned several qualities which a Chakravarti should possess or should do, and which Samudragupta has possessed in order to protect the whole earth. And it's very beautiful. So if I may quote, Paritoshita Prachanda Shasanasya Aneka Bhrashta Rajyotsana Raja Vamsa Pratistapano Bhuta Nikhila Bhuvana Vicharana. Very interesting. It says, in order to protect the earth, first, Nikhila Bhuvana, travel around the world, find out where there are Aneka Bhrashta Rajya. So, where there are the fallen, the anarchic, the disordered countries, right? Today we call them the failed states. Make these failed states functioning again. And how to make them functioning? Raja Vamsa Pratisthapana. So find out if there are any extinct, old, popular families, popular ruling families, make them participate in the government and re-establish a functioning government out. Now, just to pause a bit, if you look at the entire 20th century and the 21st century, all foreign interventions which have happened, okay, they have made functioning states and functioning countries and functioning governments into failed states. Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, you name it basically. Now here in the Chakravarti Kshetra concept, what you're saying is find failed states and don't conquer them, but ensure that you have people out there, the extinct families, the popular families, bring them in a participative mode of government and re-establish those failed states. So first is find the failed states and re-establish it. Secondly, Kripana Dina Nata Atura, Janodharana, Satra Diksha Abhyupagata, Manasa Samedhasya, Vigrahavato Loka Anugrahasya, Dhanada, Varuna, Indra, Antaka Samasya, Swabhujabala Vijitaneka, Narapati, Vibhava, Pratyarpana, Nitya Priti, Ayukta Purushasya. Very interesting. Two things it says. It says that appoint Ayuktas, Ayukta Purushasya. So Ayuktas are economic advisors who will go to these different kings who are within the Chakravarti Kshetra. For what? For restoring their wealth, for having economic prosperity, shared economic prosperity. I think it's a very important point even from an Indian context, right? Can we have economic prosperity without technology and knowledge barriers? An example is our vaccine Maitri. During the recent COVID, during the COVID pandemic, despite of India's own pressing needs, we actually shared vaccine doses in 90 plus countries. I think there were 160 million doses. 15 million were just outright grants in the early phase itself. At a time when the whole world was, there was a big problem of access. So this whole concept of, so again, look at it from a historical perspective. A history of colonialism in the post, I would say, imperialistic age, right? Where you go and you loot resources or you take resources from other countries. Or the point that you are in the center of this universe, everyone pays you tribute. Here in opposite, you have these Ayuktakas, these consultants who go and actually make you economic progress. They advise you how to restore your wealth, right? So it is the second. And why? Why should you do this? Because Kripana Dinanata Atur. So you have to have Kripa, you have to have compassion, you have to have kindness. The Chakravarti has to have kindness for whom? For the most miserable, for the most poor, for the forlorn, and for the suffering, right? And because of that, that is why he spreads this this kind of economic prosperity, shares the technology, shares the knowledge, makes failed states functioning again. But for all these idealistic things, you need two very important things. So my second line here, verse 8.1, you need a constitutional or institutional mechanism, right? You cannot, Chakravarti can't be himself. So you need dharma, the principles of right conduct, the principles of how to conduct in society and in polity. And very importantly, you also need military strength. So you need to be a Parakrama Chakravarti. Krita Bahu Virya Prasara Dharani Bandasya Prithvyam Apratirathasya. So you need to have the strength, the Bahu Virya, the Bahu Bala to actually Dharani Bandha. This earth has to be bound together, has to be tied together. For that you need, because why? Because there will always be agents. Now people will say today there are a lot of failed states, but they are failed because of their own policies. So there are countries which used to promote cross-border terrorism. They are in a very pitiable state right now. So should we make them functioning again? So Chakravarti Kshetra says make states functioning, but make them within the framework of dharma and make them within the framework that has always a military deterrent power which maintains order. So if anybody acts as a chaos or an agent of chaos, right, that military power can also restore the order which is enclosed by this dharma. So that is a very constitutional concept of world order and world economic prosperity. And finally, the Chakravarti has to be equal in the qualities of Dhanadashri, Varuna, Indra, Antaka Samasti. So Kubera, Dhanadashri is Lord Kubera, the for wealth and prosperity. Varuna, preserver of order. So Lord Varun, the god Varun has to be, he preserves order. And how does he preserve order? Through maintaining order in the global commons, what we call the oceans, the waters, the skies. So today, in fact, very interestingly, you have the United Nations Convention of Sea Lanes of Communication. To maintain trade commerce, the maritime sphere has to be free. It cannot be the party of claims and counterclaims by national sovereignties, right? So this whole concept of Varuna, preserver of order beyond global commons, becomes very important. Indra is the king of Devaloka. He is also a repository of all the knowledge of the heavens. So in the Mahabharata, Arjuna learns a lot of his, I would say, divine knowledge, the sacred astras from actually Lord Indra. So like Indra, you need to have political sovereignty, political credibility. And for that, you need to also spread that knowledge of political credibility to different parts of the world. Finally, Yama. Yama is Dharmaraja. The god Yama is Dharmaraja. He has to have unbiased justice. Right and wrong is very clear out here. So a dispassionate sense of justice. A combination of all this is what makes the Chakravarti protect the earth. Professor, now for those interested, is the original a screenshot of the original Brahmi kind of writing in this. The last three lines are the thing on Varuna, Indra, and Lord Yama, which I was talking about. So just to recapitulate points. So making failed states functioning, but within the concept of dharma and with a deterrence. Spread the best technology and knowledge practices, very important, especially in today's age of IPR. An international vision for a world based on sensitivity and kindness. And finally, a world governance without a strong proactive military is like a toothless tiger. So you need to have a very strong military deterrence also. Now, all this is a Chakravarti concept in a practical level. But from a world, if you want to form a world governance institution, how should that institution view itself? What should be the vision and mission of that institution? Now, Krishna Vande Jagadguru, as per our Bharatiya civilization, Lord Sri Krishna is the world teacher. And Lord Sri Krishna has given a very beautiful advice to Samrat Yudhishthira, who was the eldest of the Pandava brothers in the Mahabharata, which is the foundational text of our civilization. In this advice, after a Rajasuya Yagna, so Rajasuya Yagna is a Yagna which is made to proclaim your sovereignty, especially like you are a Chakravarti, etc. Now, in that Rajasuya Yagna, Lord Sri Krishna, before he departs, he gives this advice to Yudhishthira. 2 or 3 points which I found are very beautifully mentioned here. Number one, ceaseless vigilance. Okay, now just to give a disclaimer, the actual translation in words differ from, I would say, edition to edition. So I've simplified it here just to get the message. I mean, just to give a disclaimer here. But 2 or 3 very interesting points here. Number one, extreme alertness always. So Chakravarti and government has to be alert to problems, not be reactive, but be proactive. Secondly, patience. Very important to have patience to listen to multiple points of view and then act. Obviously, he has to be all embracing. So he has to be like a father is to his children, or he has to be like a person who has genuine who genuinely protects his different subjects. Finally, and very importantly, and which is I think very important for today, is he has to be free from pride and free from passions. He has to rule in a detached manner. Now, I want to really focus on this. Today, we live in an age of national exceptionalism. Okay, I'll give a classic example: human rights. Now, there are some nations which have commissions to comment on human rights of other countries, right? So why does this have it's a holier than thou attitude, right? So what happens in my country, that's not human rights, that's a great democracy. But what happens in some other country, oh my God, that is human rights. Similarly, what happens against certain culture or certain, that is discrimination. What happens against some other community, some other is not, this we can forget about. So why does it happen? It's exceptionalism. I am exception. Non-proliferation treaty, classic examples. We all believe in nuclear disarmament, but 5 countries can have nuclear weapons. And that is precisely the reason which I think India consistently opposed that stance. And I mean, that's a huge history behind it. So nation-based accept, why does this come? It comes because of an attachment to ego. It comes because of attachment to pride. So Krishna's advice is Lord Krishna's advice is very important here. As a Chakravarti, as a form of world government, be detached from national egos, be detached from national exclusivism, right? And to understand this, how patience and alertness is very important. Now, in Indian tradition, we have this concept of Purva Paksha. Before you attack somebody else, first understand that person's point of view. Indian civilization is a huge tradition of debates, of discussions, different sampradayas, different points of view to discuss and debate in a peaceful manner. That's why peace and prosperity went together. It was not a violent clash of ideologies. So Purva Paksha is very important. Concept of non-attachment. And what will this result in? This concept of non-attachment, it guides society to a higher consciousness. And this whole vision of a higher consciousness is very beautifully put in this coin inscription. Okay, this is called a chhatra type of gold coin inscription around the 4th century CE. It says, Shitama Vijayati Sut Charitrayam Divyam Jayati Vikramaditya. So Vikramaditya is known as one of the great Chakravartis. It thinks, having conquered this Kshitij earth, Vikramaditya aspires to conquer the heavens, how and for his people, through Sut Charitra. So only by changing your Charitra, by changing your individual personalities, you can win heavens, you attain a higher level of consciousness. Now that personality can be changed at an individual level, at a social level, that you can be more kind, you can be more compassionate, you can forget all those values only if you have an enabling world governance infrastructure, and the Chakravarti acts as an ideal. So the ultimately vision of world governance here is to take you to a higher level of consciousness. So spiritualism is not abstract. It is a very practical concept within a political and social construct. Now, I thought I'll just give some examples from our world history on how this Chakravarti Kshetra actually acted in practice, if I may kind of give that. So firstly, I initially told an inscription that the Chakravarti had to embody qualities of Kubera, Varuna, Indra, Yama. So if I go one by one, right? Kubera is a symbol for wealth and prosperity. So I would take it that as a Chakravarti, I have to share economic prosperity without any technology or knowledge barriers, right? So if suppose a vaccine is very important in a certain country, I don't need to have IPRs. I don't need to have costing issues. I need to have that, right? So very interestingly, now I give an example from Yunnan. It's present in present-day southwestern China. There's a very interesting Ming account by I Zixiu in the Gazette of the Dengchuan subprefecture around the 1646 CE. That's the later Ming period, after the Ming Empire was, in the throes of a breakup, and in the southern part of China, the Ming Empire, the legatees are still remaining. It says that in Yunnan there's a very ancient indigenous community called Bai, very ancient. It's a very that community Bai, for 2000 years it kept alive a tradition of an event. The event was introduction of agriculture from Bharat or from India to Yunnan. Okay, and this was done by by Chakravarti, that is Ashoka, and he came to be known as Baifang Wang, or the king of white rice. So so you can imagine how transformative that technology, sharing of technology at that point of time just sharing of agricultural practices, without any barriers, etc., that transformed the society so much that even for 2000 years, this community or this tribe remembered it as their origin. Now, actually, it may have been the origin, may not have been origin. Historically, there may be debate. But the fact that it is survived in a memory shows how this act of spreading this agricultural technology helped. So I think that's one very interesting example. Chakravarti should embody qualities of Yama. So Yamadev, if you look at it, is Dharmaraja, one who dispassionately can give justice, the difference between right and wrong, and without emotions in a free and fair manner. Now, there is a Perso-Arabic writer called Abu Jafar Muhammad bin Zarir al-Tabari, who wrote his work called Tariq al-Rasul wa Muluk in about the 9th century. There's a very interesting tale of Zarj the Indian in book 4, 4th section of it. As per this account, a group of envoys from Mediterranean country came to Zarj and told him that we are being persecuted, please help us. What does this Zarj do? The first thing he does is he doesn't jump to a conclusion. He considers both points of view. He, in fact, sends spies to that actual country to find out what is the economic condition, is it economically prosperous, how popular is the government, is there really a persecution happening? So an independent ground verification is carried out, both points of view are studied, and then a decision is come. So I want to present this as, any decisioning in today's world and any conflict, when there are two parties, it should not be national interest or let's say, a kind of favoritism which works, but a dispassionate. We see it today an example, for example, United Nations Security Council listing of terrorists. It's a very simple thing, right? A terrorist is a terrorist. When you have FATF strictures, when you have other strictures, they should be called a terrorist. Still, we find some terrorists are not listed. There are some veto being applied by certain countries. So why does double standards? So if we have a dispassionate view of basically of the problems in the world, such a kind of, I would say, favoritism will not. So this is an example which I have of a very strict, I would say, a sense of justice being put forward. Obviously, in this story, later Zarj realizes that there's a persecution happening and actually goes and punishes this ruler. Then Chakravarti embodying the qualities of Varun Dev. Now, Lord Varun is the preserver of order, okay, and he has an overview or a rule over entirely all the oceans, the waters across the world. So, especially for the maritime sphere, I have an example on how the global commons, especially from an economic commerce point of view, were maintained by a Chakravarti. So, the Malacca Straits, the ASEAN region, the Indo-Pacific as they call it, is a very important region even today for East-West trade. So trade from China, Japan, right up to India, Africa, Middle East, Europe has to pass through this region. Now, in around the 9th century, we have Arabic and Chinese sources which tell us that there was an increase in monopolistic practices by certain maritime authorities in this region, in several ports. So taxes were imposed on merchants, and there was discriminatory taxes. So merchants are forced to disembark their goods and give it to only certain organizations which these maritime authorities supported. So there'll be one governor of a port, he'll say only give it to XYZ. Similarly, some people were not allowed access to certain trade marts, certain markets. So there was some discrimination being practiced. So one of the impacted organizations was an Indian merchant organization called Manik Gramam. Manikka Gramam. In that inscription is called Manikirman also. So this Manik Gramam went to the an emperor of from Bharat called the Pallava Emperor Nandivarman III. Okay, so who hailed from his capital was in Kanchipuram, which is in the Tamil region. And this Nandivarman III, Nandivarman Avani Narayan, beautiful name. You can actually look at it. So this Nandivarman III actually dispatched a fleet, and in a place called Takuapa, which is in modern-day Thailand, they set up a military cum civilian base. Now, there's an inscription in Takuapa also on this. Now, what it is based on is for under half a century, it ensured a deterrence for anybody who wanted to monopolize trade. So it ensured free trade. So all merchants could access the ports. All of them could carry direct voyages. All of them could, disembark their goods. So free commerce and trade in the global commons, a rule-based order was maintained because of Pallava Nandivarman's naval expedition. Now, I want to give a modern example here. We have the United Nations Convention of Sea Lanes of Communication. Today, we have a huge dispute which happens, especially in Indo-Pacific. We have the South China Sea dispute, right? So, when we have a rule-based order, okay, when you have a very dispassionate preserver of order or preservation of order, then such disputes don't occur, because these disputes occur because of national egos or national attachments, which you have seen earlier. Now, I go finally to so Indradev is a symbol of political sovereignty. Now, a lot of Indradev's knowledge and Indradev's ability also comes from his Rajaguru Brihaspati. So, if you look, what I want to bring the angle here is there are examples on how our Chakravartis of Bharat spread these political values along with social, cultural, spiritual values through what they call in the East as Dharma masters, or what we call as Rajaguru. So I want to give two examples of this and how the so as a Chakravarti, people will say it's all good to say that you have military power, you have these idealism, etc. But people are different, governments are different. So how will they imbibe your ethos, your political ethos? For that, you have these knowledge mentors, as you can call them, these Rajagurus who go and help them out. First, I would like to go in the 5th century. So in the 5th century, in the Indo-China region, right, there was continuous conflict. So the kingdom of Champa, which is in modern-day Vietnam, was in conflict with these kingdoms of southern China. Okay, Nanki and the Champa kingdom. Then Funan, which is in modern-day Cambodia, was in conflict with Champa. So there was a lot of triangular conflict in this region. Now in the 6th century, the first half of 6th century, we actually find peace being established in this region, and lot of, let's say, embassies being established. So what really happened in the first half of 6th century? We find a very dramatic and incredible trend. So there was this very learned acharya called Paramartha. So Paramartha was appointed by a late Gupta emperor. Okay. Now, as per R.C. Majumdar, the famous historian, this was Vishnu Gupta. Some other historians told any other Gupta emperor, but the late Gupta emperor appointed Paramartha as a Dharma master to two kingdoms, the Funan kingdom in Cambodia and the Liang Empire of China. Now, it's very interesting to understand Paramartha. So, Paramartha, as this quote of a Chinese quote of Pao Kui says, was a person very proficient in scriptures, very proficient in spiritual, religious, different sciences, etc. But very importantly, Paramartha translated two lives of two great Indian Chakravartis. One is Ashoka, which in Chinese was called Ayuwang Jin, which the Emperor Wu of Liang actually held a public procession and a public court to propagate this translation. Second, interestingly, he also translated on Chakravarti Vikramaditya. So if you look at Paramartha's Vasubandhu, there's a very detailed tale about Vikramaditya. In fact, if you look at life of Vasubandhu, it starts with Lord Sri Vishnu fighting the Rakshasas in Purushapura. So that's how it starts with. Then it goes to King Vikramaditya rendering justice to two different disputants which are there. But the interesting point here is two Chakravartis, Ashoka and Vikramaditya, enter into the cultural landscape of China through this one Dharma master. So it is very wrong to say that a Dharma master is only religious and spiritual and they didn't do political aspects. In fact, there's a very interesting book also written on Emperor Wu, which calls him the Bodhisattva Chakravarti. So he modeled himself as a Chakravarti after these, let's say, Indian Chakravartis. So very importantly, Paramartha both in Funan and China, and corresponding to the peace established in that period. So see, what happens is automatically when you channelize your mind towards such matter. So if you look at here that a lot of these sutras were translated. So the entire creative energies of these kingdoms went into translating the sutras, learning from them. So the entire national mindsets of these regions and these kingdoms went into learning or sharing ideas. When that came, national egos itself went to background and conflicts were resolved. So very interesting how political and social concepts and cultural concepts are transmitted to these countries. Second example I'll give a Dharma master is a great Mahapandita called Atisha Dipankara Srijana. Now he was a Rajguru of the Pala Empire of Banga of Bharat, from the Bengal region. Now Atisha Dipankara Srijana actually studied under another great Indian Acharya called Chandra Kirti in Sumatra. So Acharya Chandra Kirti was a Rajguru of the Shailendra of Sumatra. Atisha Dipankara came back to Bharat. He became the Rajguru for the Pala Empire. He was called by a king in Tibet. So at that time, Tibet was in chaos. There was complete anarchy. There was disorder. There were foreign invasions. The culture was completely degenerating. So Atisha Dipankara Srijana went to Tibet, and he actually ushered in a new age of cultural, religious, and spiritual progress. and interestingly also unified Tibet as a nation. So from a national reconciliation point of view, Atisha Bangladesh region is very important. So under another concept of how a possible, now we got an example of failed states being, I would say, put here again. Here was a country in anarchy and disorder being put back because of, let's say, the political, social, and cultural values of Bharat being transmitted. So if I may just conclude with some thoughts, the Chakravarti Kshetra model is not against any nation. So we're not saying that if you are a Chakravarti, you're going to fight wars, etc. There is military which is important. That is to maintain order and to see that the order is preserved. It's also a practical charter because it gives you a vision, the vision of raising the consciousness of societies, and it gives that consciousness to how to being kind, being compassionate, practically increasing shared economic prosperity, sharing technology knowledge, for looking at disorders, proactively reacting to it. Finally, it gives a respect to nature and environment. And I want to come here. So a lot of people will say, what does this higher consciousness mean? So if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, one of the very famous shlokas is when Lord Sri Krishna tells us, Sammoham sarva bhuteshu, na me dveshosti na priya. So not in dvesha, not in priya, I am in sammoham sarva bhuteshu. The divine is there in every single order, in every single organism of this universe, of this earth. So that realization that every living being and every living organism of this universe and earth is divine, you know, that realization will automatically also help us as society tackle our changes, resource exploitation, climate change, a clash of ideologies, fanatical mindsets. If you realize that there's a divinity in every single organism, every single part of this earth, then is when the Indian concept of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the world as one family, becomes clear to you. And for this, it's not an abstract concept. To make this practical, you have the Chakravarti Kshetra as a model for a world geopolitical order. So that is precisely, I would say, what my thoughts are on this concept. So world peace and conflict resolution are not just an ad hoc measure of going to two countries or saying who is right or wrong. It is an entire social mindset. And this social mindset needs to be within a larger order of shared economic prosperity, of shared technology, of shared knowledge. I'll conclude with giving a classic example of what I feel is a very brilliant example of Chakravarti Kshetra. The International Solar Alliance, which is spearheaded by our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji. Today we talk about climate change. Everybody's talking about climate change. There are carbon markets, high-held terms, but an actual workable solution of mobilizing over 1,000 billion US dollars for I would 120 countries in a tropical belt. It includes the least developed and small island nations. That mobilization, that level of investment, and that is where you get that whole concept of knowledge as also as resource sharing, which can be pooled together for the world benefit. So I feel that this whole Chakravarti Kshetra concept is a very important concept for our current world geopolitical order. Thank you, bro. Thank you for your patient hearing, everyone. Thank you for your patient hearing and give me the opportunity, Professor Ji. Over to you for.
Thank you. Very good, excellent presentation. In fact, right from your first slide, you completely concentrated on the topic. I was particularly impressed when you presented the causes for conflict. Causes of conflict. You are very right. The causes arise from inequality in access to resources and inability to accept, diversity. These are all very, very important aspects. And, for all each of these things, we have to learn lessons from our ancient Bharatiya civilization, ancient records. We all know, we see divinity in every being, even living, non-living being also. We accept all forms of diversity. At the same time, we always wanted to give equality in terms of access to resources. We all know that when you mentioned about agriculture, I remember always this one word from Mahabharata, Annam Bahu Kurvita. So Dharma always used to say, make abundant production of food, so that no one would starve for want of food. And they established facilities throughout the country so that access to food, minimum facilities was always assured in ancient India. In fact, it was the duty of the king as you rightly pointed out, what are the characteristics of the kings? They defined it and they practiced it. These are all important aspects that we have to learn. Leaders have to learn in the modern contemporary world. And you presented the other points also, like expansionistic approaches, etc., lack of representation of marginalized voices, etc. Now we should be happy that India, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, is presenting the voices for the rest of the world as well. We all know. I remember even in 2015, when India spoke at the WTO. It spoke for not just India but for the entire what they call third world countries, developing countries. These developing countries were once developed regions. They were colonized, and as a result of which it became third world countries. So now, and you explained this vaccine issue, where India delivered these vaccines free of cost to many countries and to other countries at concessional rates and all. So under Prime Minister Modi in the recent periods, now we are practicing our ancient dharmic principles, our traditional civilizational practices. So these are very, very important. And unless all the countries realize it and join together, as in the case of International Solar Alliance, it will be very difficult. For example, terrorism, we all have to fight together. So in that respect, India is again emerging as a leader after maybe 200, 300 years. India now is emerging as the leader at the global level, for which we get inspiration from our civilization, our thoughts, our practices. So you have made a very excellent presentation. And as you said, in our tradition, knowledge is always universal. We don't think that knowledge belongs to us. So for us, everything belongs to the humankind as a whole. So this is how we have lived, and you have presented the salient features of our thoughts on peace and conflict resolution from the ancient records. So thank you very much. We have another 17 minutes. I think, Mr. Jagan, if you have questions, you raise, and then we can leave it for our friends.
Yes, sir. Fantastic. As Professor Sir highlighted, it's a very fantastic and informative and thoroughly researched work which Venkatesh Ranganji has presented this evening to all of us. Thank you so much. We can ask the audience to
Yes.
open up for questions. You can unmute yourself and ask questions to the honorable speakers. Yes, Akavidyaka, very enlightening session you have posted. You can ask a question. If yes, you have raised your hand, please go ahead, Akka.
Yeah, thank you. Namaste, Venkatesh ji. Namaste, Professor. I'm very, very grateful and very glad that I was able to attend today's session. So the question that I have is when you're looking at our ancient history, you had mentioned about all these tactics which is used for governance. Was there any time during the ancient time where they had to use some kind of a little bit of extra force, where it is not exactly very peaceful, but it was needed to restore order for the greater good? Could there be some suggestions on that as well? Some examples that would be really nice. Thank you, Venkatesh.
Sure. So I think the biggest example of that is in the Mahabharata itself, the Kurukshetra war. Now, if you actually look at it, the Kurukshetra war, there were a lot. So Lord Krishna actually tried his best to see that this conflict will be avoided. But when it came to a point where, it was not the concept of one land or village or let's say a territory. It was a concept of what kind of world you'll actually want to be in. So I got this concept of Chakravarti Kshetra, right? So who will be a right Chakravarti? Will Duryodhana as a Chakravarti fulfill all those qualities? Kindness, compassion. Will he be a Varuna? Will he be a Indra? Will he be a Dhanada? Will he be a Yama? Will he be dispassionate? Will he kind of be able to, put the justice on to? Will he go and help fallen countries, extinct families back? And when you look at his own history, the whole Mahabharata, you get very clear that this is a person who will not beat a Chakravarti. And when you will not beat a Chakravarti, can you let this world slip into chaos? Which you cannot. And that is why the Kurukshetra war becomes so necessary. It is not about personal relations. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says, how can I fight all of them, right? Remember the Rajasuya Yagna advice. Without attachment, without passions, without pride, there's no attachment here. I mean, there's no pride that I am a Kuru, I belong to the Bharata family, etc. You have to fight it for that larger vision. And that vision of that dharma, of having that peaceful, that taking the society to a higher consciousness, that can only happen. And that's why the war happened. The war was very fearful. The war was a very, I would say, all kind of weapons and astras were used in that war. But that war had to happen for that to be a new order. I would say in today's context, we can call it new geopolitical order. And I feel the war was decided at that point of time when Lord Shri Krishna gave that option to Duryodhana. You either have me or the army. And Duryodhana said, I don't want you, I want the army. So the very classic example of leading to a higher level of consciousness never came out. So I would say Kurukshetra is a classic example of this. And I think it is something we all should keep in our mind throughout. Professor G, any comments?
Yes, I want to add one point. Even when our kings used force and won wars earlier, they made it a practice that once they capture a land or a region, they go to the failed king, whom they defeated, and take him or her to the temple, and then pray at the temple where they used to pray, and then give an undertaking that, you can follow all your traditions as you have been following for thousands of years. I will not interfere. I will be your king. But all your sacred practices, traditions would be followed, and I would be the guardian for it. And this is how they have been doing. Even when after they won wars, they did not interfere in the practices, traditions, faiths of the people of that region. This is one finest quality that we have to learn. Any country should learn from the Indian civilization. This is a very, very important point. And I want to add one more aspect that you rightly mentioned, the role of Rajagurus. Rajagurus played the most important role. We all know in the case of Maharaj, Shivaji Maharaj, and even in the case of Vijayanagara Empire, Rajagurus played a very, very important role. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Venkatesh ji, Professor. Very enlightening.
No, thank you, Vidyaji. Very nice question. Very enlightening question. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions you can please ask? Professor, sir, you want to add a few more points, sir?
Yes, if there is no other question, then I would like I would request our guest, Sri Venkatesh, to explain on. He was mentioning about this minister in charge of ethics, Venkatesh. That's one important aspect that I never knew. You said ministers, I did not note it down. Ministers in charge of ethics.
The Prayag Prashasti?
Yeah.
So it was written by a foreign minister.
Okay.
The foreign relations. And
did you say there were ministers in charge of resolving conflicts, etc., in the earlier periods?
So I had mentioned the Rajgurus who resolved conflicts, and there was Ayuktakas who were responsible for increasing the economic prosperity and the resources of the specific.
Okay. Then one more point we can add related to this topic. In Indian way of life, peace and conflict resolution was not just practiced at the national, international level. It started from the individual level. Always Indian society aimed for peace within oneself, conflict resolution within the family, even within our own selves and within the family, for which, they have developed many mechanisms, maybe yoga, other mechanism, family as a concept. And at the social level also, we see, how layers after layers of um, setups were there, village level, different levels, for which there were rules, regulations, etc. So, as far as the peace and conflict resolution is concerned, Indian society always aspired for peace and conflict resolution from the individual level. So, from the individual level to the international level, this concept was existing, and society was always trying to bring peace, end this conflict resolution, and this is a very, very important subject, issue that we have to understand when we discuss this in G20. So, what do you feel?
No, totally. In fact, I think that what is a distinguishing feature of Indian civilization versus the rest? If you put in one point, this is a civilization which asks the individual to look inwards,
Yeah.
to find a higher consciousness. Okay, so it was not so. Yes, so there was a way of living, there was a way of governing, there was a way of being in society, but all this, the objective was to find that higher level of consciousness. So why do you do a lot of the lot of the anusthanas? Why do you do a lot of these paramparas? They are ultimately to discipline your mind and to discipline yourself so that you can have that ability to actually look inward and get peace and get at higher consciousness. What is higher consciousness? It is a level in which I don't feel agitated. It is that. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, right, I unceasingly do actions, but without generating a karma for it, right? So there's no attachment, there's no consequence. So what that happens is I am that level of even-mindedness, where neither anger nor a huge level of favoritism, happiness comes into me. And when I have that even-mindedness, even as a society,
Yes.
I'll obviously not be aggressive.
Yes.
Now look at it, right? Terrorism, we call it terrorism, right? Look at when you have cross-border terrorism, who are these terrorists, right? They were people who had a very, I would say, a crazy, a very mentally disturbed kind of mind. So they were not at peace with themselves. Now, if in Sanatan Dharma, you have to be at peace with yourself first. And I think
Yes.
that is a foundational step for any world peace which kind of comes in. I think a
Correct.
society will not be aggressive if the individual is ultimately known how to conquer aggression. I mean,
Yes. And Vidyaji raised a very important question. Uh, you know, uh, you know better. You have explained it in even our earlier discussion. Whenever there was a need for war, of course, we always try to resolve conflict to the maximum possible extent. But whenever we needed a war or war was forced upon us, and Indian civilization never retreated from it. We faced the war very boldly, sacrificed it. And for sometimes, in the case of Lord Ram temple issue, Mandir issue, we have been fighting for several centuries. So Indians never shied away from going on for war or for, um, you know, uh, getting our rights whenever there was need. So this again, we have to understand when we speak about peace and conflict resolution, we should not think we always wanted peace. Yes, we wanted peace only. But when war was forced upon us, then we were ready to take the risk and then fight. And as we all know, most of the time we have been winning for the right cause. So even if we lose, we lost for the right cause only. So this is again another important issue that particularly youngsters should understand.
no, totally. In fact, there's a difference between peace with strength and
Yes.
peace with weakness.
Yes.
You can very interesting. Right? So wrote a book. Now my third book is basically on Bharat's military conquest abroad, right? So a lot of people say, Ari, how can we conquer? But we never conquered for domination, etc. We conquered. If you invade us, we are not weaklings who just. So just imagine this. About 10 years ago, we had this concept that however much our terrorism strikes, I'll have strategic restraint. I will not cross my borders. Now, what kind of defense is that?
Yes.
Now, when somebody is attacking you, you need to prove your strength, your parakrama. I was
Yes.
talking about Chitta Bahu Virya. Only
Yeah.
when you prove a fellow that, boss, I am parakram, will he then understand that, okay, if I kind of create any mess, I have a military capacity to kind of. So in fact, my book, deals on this in the fact that we were peaceful. Our Chakravarti Kshetra was all these ideals. But if somebody did invade us, we had enough military capacity to also repeat it. Chhatrapati
Yes.
Shivaji Maharaj and Swaraj is a classic example of that. I mean, when it was thought that everything was dead, you had this, as Jagannath Sarkar said, that tree was never dead. It was always alive. It came across, and the Kshatriya Dharma is the one which again established this wide empire, which was the empire of the Maratha Empire and the Swaraj. So yes, I mean, I would completely agree with you. There's peace which
Yes. And when we speak about peace and conflict resolution again, we should tell the world that we have solutions for almost all the issues, beginning from the individual level to the national level. Of course, now discussions are taking place, at the international level. But this should be emphasized from the local individual level also. So this is time for us to present our civilizational thoughts and practices to the world. Of course, Prime Minister now, through his different actions, he has proved that India is always stood for Vasudeva Kudumbakam. This is at the national, international, social level. But at the individual level also, I think time has come for us to present our thoughts before the world.
Sure. I think Vidyaji has raised her hand, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
Yes,
please.
actually, this is talking about the contemporary times. Venkatesh, you must be listening. The situation is pretty volatile in different parts of India. And I just read a post sometime earlier where they mentioned that about 2,500 Hindus were grouped together and they were not in a state to save themselves. I think what happened in Haryana, if I'm not mistaken, I forget the name of the place. And so there are other people commenting, why couldn't these people do anything to save themselves? So when in a situation like that, sometimes what happens is your straight thinking gets shut down. You're not able to, you're in a state of panic. You don't know how to save yourself. So in that kind of a situation, such a volatile situation, how are people like us who do not want to further increase the conflict, how can we make the other people who want the conflict to continue, how are we in a position to convince them and finally bring a truce, or at least to end the conflict, at least, because it is so difficult to make them see sense, and they are so hung up on just one ideology alone. They refuse to see anything beyond that. So to those kind of people, how do we make them see sense so that the order is restored? Thank you.
So Vidyaji, I will see this at a larger context, because it's not just one district or I would say one country. Unless you address this at a world level, right, you'll always have some repercussions out here. And that's also because the way the populations are concentrated, etc. across. So I'll come back to my first slide, right? What are the causes of conflict of this world? Okay, they are a lack of acceptance of diversity. They are an ideological supremacist behavior which is there. And how do we change that, right? And that is because in the world you don't have a world governance which actually promotes your way of thinking, right? It does. So is there anyone saying sammoham sarva bhuteshu in world or in the UN? I mean, you have a United Nations Security Council, but in terrorism there's a disagreement. How can there be disagreement in terrorism? So see, unless that mindset changes, and that is why we need this Chakravarti Kshetra concept for that concept, because we need to make people realize at a world level that the consciousness needs to be higher. You need to accept diversity. You need to accept that level. Now, at a local level and at a country level, that will never solve it at that level, right? You have to have it at a world and a social level. So it may take time, but that has to be that's the only way ahead.
Right. And until then, there will be a lot of collateral damages, I guess, until it comes into effect.
I mean, unfortunately,
yeah.
I think I'll go back to my first slide.
Yeah.
Lack of acceptance of diversity, ideological supremacy.
Right. Thank you,
Professor, if anything.
Yes. This is a completely different topic. Yes. These ideologies exist now. Only thing is, we have to educate people about the um, Indian civilizational, Hindu civilizational ideas. And then as a nation, we have to be powerful. Then only within the nation also, we have to have a nationalistic, strong nationalistic government. At the international level, our nation should be very strong. Then only, we can take forward the civilizational ideas like Vasudeva Kudumbakam. And until such time, yes, these problems will exist.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jagan.
Actually, these points, if these could be inculcated right from the school level, it would be great, so that it's part of the curriculum as well.
Yes. It's taking place. It's taking place.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vidyaji.
Thank you.
So thank you, Venkatesh ji. Now I'll hand it over to our friend Jagannathan.
Thank you all. Thank you, Professor Sir. Thank you, Venkatesh Ranganji. I think we can only talk peace from a position of strength and draw inspiration from the Sanatana values that our great civilization has to offer. A very, very interesting and enlightening session. Thank you so much. And stay tuned to the social media handles of Y20, SPMRF, and Varanda Club for forthcoming programs, Y20 Talks with Professor Sir and other personalities. Thank you so much. Professor Sir, you'd like to add some closing remarks?
Thank you. Sri Venkatesh Rangan has made a very good, excellent presentation based on his vast knowledge of Indian Bharatiya records and scriptures such as particularly Mahabharata and all. So we were all pleased to listen to him. So thank you very much, Mr. Venkatesh. We look forward to learning from you very often. Thank you.
And Professor, thank you also to you. That I think it's been an honor that I have interacted with an erudite person like you, not once but even twice. So I really thank you for this opportunity, and I also thank Jagannathan ji from Veranda Club for actually hosting and giving me this platform.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thanks. Pleasure and honor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jagan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Vande Mataram. Thank you.
Vande. Yes.